Max Verstappen once said about Formula 1, understeer is just slow. Let's talk about this. This is a very technical explanation of why fast drivers prefer oversteer to understeer, why staying in the comfort zone of driving safer setups is making you slower, and how you can develop the ability to drive more oversteer cars. If you watch this video until the end and apply its techniques, you will probably find over a second per lap and become a lot more comfortable with oversteer cars. Every detail in this video is important, and if you think this video is too long, start reflecting on how much effort you're really willing to spend to become a better driver. Everyone has that teammate that is faster, and when you let them make the setup, it's just irritatingly difficult to drive. You can't find consistency with it, spin all the time, and finally the solution for you is to make the setup of the car a little bit safer so you can finally do a full lap without spinning or crashing. And you probably hate that person because they are a second per lap faster in a setup that you can't even drive. What is it that they have in their driving skill that you don't? Is it simply better driving? First of all, let's destroy this belief that someone is simply better and that you cannot achieve that ever. Whatever the faster driver is doing in that difficult setup, it is something objective, tangible, measurable, and you can definitely learn how to replicate it. What is difficult is to find a way to replicate it. Normally, before you find this new way of driving, you start trying oversteer cars and all you do is spin because there's not a lot of room for correction when you start losing the rear, and then you start getting frustrated and scared of oversteer setups. It becomes a big mental challenge to even try again, and you start running out of ideas. So you give up, and then you come back to a safer, more understeer car. We can call this a plateau, where you just get stuck in your driving skills and you cannot improve. But why is oversteer faster than understeer? Let's start with understeer. The front tires are on the limit, the car is going to more or less this direction, and these tires are over the limit and they are trying their best to rotate the car, but the rear tires are not on the limit. So what you see right now is a small force being created by the rear tires, not on the limit. Say the ideal could be a bigger arrow here, but you're not able because the front tires now are dying, right? So the front tires are trying their best. Ideally, they could even do a little bit more, but because you went over, you're starting to scrub the tire, and the angle between the direction of the tire and direction of the car is too high. So the car is way over the optimal slip angle, and because of that, the actual lateral load, the actual lateral force that it creates is smaller. So when you're understeering, you're actually over the limit on the front tires, and they are not working to their optimal capability. So in a situation where you understeer too much, you're under the optimal lateral load both on the rears and on the fronts because you're over on the fronts. This is an understeer scenario where the front tires still get a little bit more lateral force than the rear tires. Even when you're abusing the fronts, that's gonna happen because the rears are just not even being asked to give you that lateral force. Now, an oversteer scenario happens when the rear tires go this way and the front tires go this way. So the front tires are asking the car to go to this direction, but the rear tires cannot resist to that rotation and they end up sliding outwards. Think like that. They are sliding outwards. This is very important. Like this. So the front tires are going to this direction, but the rear tires are trying to create a force, but they're not. That force is not enough to the actual inertia of the whole body pulling the car to that way, and the tires end up sliding to that direction. There is still a small force. The tires are still trying their best to create a lateral force to the side, but the lateral force that the front tires are making is higher, and that's why you have this scenario where eventually you will get a car that is fully spinning to this direction. In this scenario, if you do counter steer, then you end up just not using the fronts at all because you're just literally trying to catch the car back, and of course too much oversteer is bad. And then we have the optimal situation, which is right in between. We have a car that is right on the limits of both ends, both rear and front, and then you are getting peak lateral load from all four tires. In this situation, the car is kind of dancing a little bit on both ends. It's not understeering, it's not oversteering. It's doing both at a microscopic level. And here's what's cool. When you have a car that only understeers, what happens is this. You get into understeer and you can never really reach the oversteer because the car is just not capable of generating that, and you end up being stuck on being on the limit of the front tires. But a car that is oversteery allows you to do both. In an oversteer car, you can still induce understeer or oversteer. The car is free and it depends a lot on your driving inputs. And what you really want is to stay right here. You want to stay on micro oversteer because that's going to allow you to be on what we call the neutral steer, which is very close to the white line in this graph. So an understeer car is very difficult to bring it back to this optimal line, but an oversteer car allows you to be on both sides depending on your inputs. This is quite tricky, but think about it. If you start oversteering, you can still mess with the weight transfer to make the fronts work for you. But if your car is understeery, it's very difficult to induce oversteer without overslowing the car. I'll say it again, without overslowing the car. You can still make the car rotate with an understeer car, but it's gonna cost speed because you will have to have more trail braking. You're gonna have to have more weight on the front tires. You're gonna have to decelerate the car more to have that weight helping the car rotate. And that is why having an understeer car is generally slower than an oversteer car, because an oversteer car already wants to rotate, and of course it's a little bit more tricky to deal with the balance with the weight transfer to keep the car on that neutral steer, but you can do that while carrying a little bit more speed than in an understeer car, where you're forced to generate that rotation with more brakes, with more weight transfer, which ends up slowing down the car more. So in the end, oversteer is faster than understeer because it allows you to spend more time right in between, in the neutral steer. If the car is too understeery, it's impossible to reach neutral steer. With an oversteer car, you can do it. Now, how do we tame oversteer cars? A lot of drivers go through the phase of driving understeer cars first because there is more time to deal with it, to think about a solution, and because it's easier to replicate. Understeer means the front tires reach their limit first, and the car starts refusing any more rotation. So the front tires are over the limit, but the rear tires are under the limit of grip. So you get a much more predictable rotation, and you don't have to do too many corrections in your inputs throughout one corner. Now, this is extremely important to understand. The biggest difference between oversteer and understeer is that oversteer requires a much faster correction. So if it happens at a moment you're not expecting, by the time you realize it's happening, you already lost the car. Let's think about this a little bit. By the time you realized it's happening, you already lost it. But how does that faster driver not spin then? Do they just have faster reaction times? No, it's not about reaction time. It's about predicting when the oversteer is most likely to happen. Think with me. It's not about the faster driver getting surprised with the oversteer and just fixing it faster than you, but rather them already knowing that there is a big chance the car will start sliding a little bit at that specific stage of the corner. So they already start adjusting their inputs and getting ready for the oversteer. In one of my recent videos about steering technique, which I strongly recommend that you patiently watch after, I say that if you turn the steering too much, you will either get too much understeer or you will snap into oversteer and spin. Most drivers that turn the steering too much are just expecting understeer. And when the oversteer happens, they are caught by surprise. But fast drivers in oversteer setups know how to induce a smaller amount of rotation to reach a smaller amount of oversteer, and they know when it's likely to happen, so there's a lot less reacting necessary than you think. Okay, so now we know why you are struggling with snap oversteer. It happens too quickly, and you don't know exactly where to expect it to happen. Why? Well, the truth is that you're making it happen. It's your fault. Let's go back to the most essential definition of oversteer. Oversteer happens when the front tires ask for an amount of rotation, but the rear tires cannot resist to that rotation, so they break loose and start sliding outwards. A better way to understand oversteer is you generate too much rotation in a too small distance. That means at some point in the corner, you were asking the car to rotate more than it was capable. And it doesn't need to be at the whole corner. All it takes is one spot where you over-rotate the car. That means it's possible to be slower than someone else in the same setup on a corner and still lose the car and spin. So this is where things get fun. Let's talk about where these snap oversteer moments tend to happen the most and the most common causes of it, so you can know how to prevent them. First, Let's start with where they happen the most. If you have my online course, the Motor Racing Checklist, you know I like dividing the corner in 4 stages. Early entry, late entry, early exit, and late exit. And the places I believe you can lose the car the most, especially in corners where you have to decelerate to do them, are the early entry and the late exit, so the extremes of the corner. On early entry, the reason you most likely lose the car is because there is still a lot of weight on the front tires because of the trail braking, and you turn in with tensed hands. That means you're strangling the steering wheel and your inputs end up being too rough, which makes the car get way too much rotation on entry, and you either spend the whole corner trying to fix it, or you simply spin. The solution to this problem is what I call the light hands technique. Turn in with a light steering input on the early entry phase, and you will see how much more controllable your entry oversteer becomes, even in a super oversteer setup. On late exit, the reason you most likely lose the car is because you are gaining speed and asking for more rotation at the same time. It's as simple as that, but it's difficult to identify and solve. So let's talk about that. Inertia tells us that the faster the car is going, the less it wants to rotate. But most of us, especially beginners, forget that when we're accelerating out of the corner. So instead of thinking about an opening spiral arc out of the corner, we think of a fixed radius arc on the exit. And this is the biggest problem you have and you don't know. And here's why. Inertia tells us that if you start slowing down the car, it's capable of rotating more and more and more and more. It creates this kind of spirally arc. But if you're accelerating, then you create the opposite. You start gaining speed and the car is capable of rotating less and less and less. So when you're decelerating into a corner, you're going to create this closing spiral, and then you're going to open it up as soon as you start accelerating. So your line is supposed to look like an ellipse like that, instead of looking like a fixed circle, because this would be at a fixed speed. But we are decelerating, we're gaining rotation, we're accelerating, we're losing rotation. Which means that this area right now, we have a lot of the rotation happening, and on this area here, we have less. This is very important because most people end up spinning either here, because they're still too fast with a lot of weight transfer and they end up getting way too much rotation on entry, or they spin right here on late exit because they are trying to have a fixed amount of rotation as in a circle. So if you're trying to do a circle in a corner, that means that you're probably going to be under the limit on this area because your speeds are lower and the car is capable of rotating more than you are here, but you're going to be over the limit on this area because you're trying to rotate the same amount at a much higher speed on both early entry and late exit. So instead of doing this, remember, if you're decelerating and accelerating, your line is going to look more like this instead. You're going to stretch that arc and you're going to create an ellipse where you concentrate more of the rotation right here and less of the rotation here. The reason people spin is they forget about that. They think about a circle as their racing line and they end up asking for an amount of rotation here that the speed does not allow it anymore. You're gaining speed, you get back on power, right? You start accelerating, the car is supposed to go wider because of the inertia. And if you try to force it more at this point, you end up spinning. So one of the reasons people spin on late exit mostly is because they are afraid of spinning from this point, right? So they get back on power and they are hesitant. They don't get the rotation that the car is capable of getting at this point because they are afraid. And then they realize, oh my God, I'm pointing too much to this direction. Now I'm going to try to compensate this rotation to try and not go wide on this area. But now at this point, it's too late. Your speed is already too high and you end up losing the car here. So what you want to do instead is concentrate more rotation at the lower speed, and then at the higher speed, inertia is going to take your car, whether you want or not, all the way to the exit. So think about that. Concentrate the rotation here. Don't hesitate. Don't be afraid of losing the car here, because you being afraid of that exit is what makes you hesitate here, not use your opportunity to rotate the car at the lower speeds, and you end up having to compensate that and forcing the car to rotate when it's not capable anymore. So now you think, okay, I spun on exit, I'm gonna have less rotation on late exit. But instead of getting less rotation on late exit, you become afraid of the oversteer overall, and you ask for less rotation on the slower speeds still. And then that forces you to try to compensate that rotation at a higher speed, and then you oversteer again. So in a way, you losing the car on late exit happens because you were afraid of losing the car on late exit, and you end up not getting enough rotation where you have to take the rotation, which is on early exit. Early exit, your speeds are still low, so you have to rotate more at that point and then open up. But if you're afraid of rotating the car on early exit where the speeds are still low, then by the time your car is getting faster and faster, then you realize, oh my god, I'm going wide, and then you try to turn more. But at that stage, just a few seconds after you were afraid of turning, now the car is fast and now you're going to spin because of that. This is way too technical to explain in just one video, and that's why I have 50 lessons about it on my online course about car handling, the motor racing checklist. But what I can tell you right now is that you've been oversteering and losing the car all the time because of just a few things. You were inducing oversteer by accident in specific stages of the corner and not having enough time to react to it because you were not expecting it. You were afraid of inducing rotation in places where you should induce the most rotation, so that you're not forced to compensate for it at a higher speed on corner exit. And you were tensing up your hands and not feeling exactly how much input was necessary to already make an oversteer car get to its limit. If this video helped you, please make sure you watch my little own ad about my online course, the Motor Racing Checklist. See you on track. Sim racing is growing more and more, and it's bringing real-life racers and sim racers together. This is making the competition level rise like I've never seen it before. So if you want to become that competitive, the secret is in the driving technique more than equipment. My professional driving technique course, the Motor Racing Checklist, already has over 3,000 drivers, including real-life drivers and professional esport drivers, just so you know how good it is. I made this course after coaching over 2,000 drivers in one-to-one live sessions, and it contains all the advanced concepts, techniques, and exercises that I've developed with my students over all these years of coaching. It's perfect for any simulator, racing games, and also for real-life drivers wanting to use a simulator to improve their real-life driving technique. This course is about car handling skills, and the goal is to make you find better lap times and consistency. You will learn how to prevent and induce specific behaviors and learn how to feel them earlier so you can predict what's happening with the car with professional precision. By the way, this course has a money-back guarantee with no questions asked. So if you don't improve, you get your money back. And you can join my Discord to read reviews and ask any questions. Join the course now and I will see you on track.